Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Yud Aleph, and we start on the top line. Unkelis bar Clonimus. Now we're not sure exactly who this fellow is, if he's the same identical Unkelis that wrote the Targum on Chumash. We're not even sure of his father's name. They're apparently different Gersos. Uh, we have in our text that his father's name was Clonimus. But others have a different text according to which his father's name was Andrianus. I don't know. Anyway, to make a long story short, we're going to learn today about Onkelos, but we're not sure if this is the Onkelos who wrote the Targum. Igayer, he was a Roman that converted to Judaism, and Shader Caesar Gunda. Okay, so there's a Caesar which is called Caesar, and he sends a gunda. Gunda means a whole group of soldiers, deromoi of Romans, abasre. Apparently, they're going to put him to death for converting to Judaism. Mashchinu bekroi. But when these Romans that formed this troop came to Onkelos, he actually mashchinu. He sort of pulled them towards Yiddishkeit by quoting different psukim of the Torah. And I don't know, it seems that they had some sort of belief in the Torah. And Igayer, they also converted. Hadar Shadar Gunda Deromoy Achrina Basrei. So he decides the Caesar to send another troop. Same thing happens. But Omalahu, even though the Caesar instructed them, Lo Temru Lev Lo Mi, they don't say anything to him, meaning, the Caesar obviously was afraid that once again, Onkelos would engage them in some sort of conversation about Pesukim. Don't talk to him. Ki Avishakli v'Azu, they were taking him along back to Rome, I guess, or to the Caesar. Ki Avishakli v'Azu, Omelahu, he says to them, Emelahu milsa b'alma. Let me tell you something that's not significant, just trivial matters. And basically, what he's doing is he's showing various names of troops, of Roman troops, and they go from the lower troop to the higher troop. So therefore, Nifyora is the lower troop, the lower level. Nokit Nura Kami Pifyora. Pifyora is the higher level troops. And Nifyora, that's the lower level troop, will be in charge of holding the torch and the torches to light up the way that they could go. And then Pifyora, which is again the higher level, is going to hold the torch for the next level, which is called Duchsa. Duchsa, on the other hand, that's the third level, is going to hold the torch for Hegmona. Hegmona is like the second in command, so you're really going high up. And then Hegmona is going to hold on to the torch to light the way Lakoma for the king himself. Okay, all this sounds trivial. And then Onkelos turns to the troops and he says to them, Koma, right now you're at the king level, Minokit Nura Mikami Inchi. Would the king belittle himself to hold the candle in front of the lower people, the rank and file citizens? Amalei, they immediately responded low. Omar lahu, but Onkelos quotes a pasuk, and again, I don't understand exactly why they're impressed by the pasuk. Hakadosh Baruch Hu nokat nura kame Yisrael. For 40 years in the Midbar, God was holding the torch, lighting up the way for the Jewish people to traverse the desert. Tichsiv Hashem holech lefneim yomam, right? Bi'amud ha'anan, and then with the Muda Eish Laila, the pillar of fire to guide them at night. Yigayer kulat. So they also converted. Again, there are probably deeper meanings here to this Gemara. But in any event, Hadar Shadar Gunda Achrina Basrei. Now Caesar tries for a third time, sends another group of soldiers, but he instructs them, don't talk to him about anything. Don't let him engage you in any conversation. It's very interesting to me that the Caesar himself, he would not go and try to bring Onkelos to judge to the courts because the Caesar himself was probably afraid that maybe he would fall into the same trap and he'd want to convert to Judaism. Anyway, Kinoktu Levi Osli, so they were taking him back to the emperor and Chazi Mezuzasa to Menach HaPischa. So they noticed a mezuzah, or at least he noticed the mezuzah. I guess Onkelos noticed the mezuzah that was hung up on the doorway. Osiv Yodei. This is the source for those who kiss the mezuzah. He put his hand on the mezuzah. V'yomru, and he asked them, "My hi, do you know what this is?" Omrule, they responded, Emelanat, why don't you tell us? Now they're violating the rule of the Caesar who said to them, don't engage in any conversation with him. So this is going to be very, very dangerous. Amalahu. So Onkelos explains to them about the mezuzah. What's the idea behind the mezuzah? Minhago shalom, according to the way of the world, melech basav dam yoshe bifnim, v'avoda mishamrim also b'chutz. The king goes inside to the palace, and his servants and his officers will guard him from the outside. His servants, meaning the people of Israel, are inside the house. And through the mezuzah, which is on the outside, God is protecting them on the inside, which is exactly the opposite of Minhago Shel Olam, where on the contrary, the king goes inside, and it's the boss of Adam, the flesh and blood of his officers who are protecting him from the outside. But here it's God protecting the Jewish people on the inside from the outside. Shenemar, as the Pasuk says, Hashem Yishmor Tzeischa Vo'echa Me'ata V'ad Olam. Right, so this Pasuk in Tehillim is very symbolic of the mezuzah, that God is protecting us. And Higayer. Again, the third group of this third troop, they also converted to Judaism, and therefore Sulo Shada Basrei, the Caesar finally gave up. He didn't think he had any hope. Vayomer Hashem lo shnei goyim vitnech, right? Rivka gets a nevuah that she's carrying two different nations in her womb. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav al tikri goyim elagayim, v'zeh Antignos v'Rebbe. So Antignos, of course, is the Roman emperor who is descendant of Esav, and Rebbe, of course, is the descendant of Yaakov. And they are called Geim. Geim means they're proud. Miloshin Geus. And how did their pride express themselves? So Posku me'al shulchonim lo chazeres lo kishas lo tznon. Lo bimos hacham v'lo b'os hagsham. In other words, they always had these three categories of vegetables on their tables, whether it was during the winter months or the summer months, which would mean that they could import these vegetables from other countries, or alternative, what it might be. I mean, all the Mefarshim ask, why was Rebbe, filling up his table with all these vegetables? The Gemara tells us in Masechta Ksubis that Rebbe, before he died, he picked up his 10 fingers to Shamayim, and he said, Ribbono Shel Olam, Golui v'yadu lefanecha, I toiled with my 10 fingers to study Torah. I didn't benefit any worldly pleasures. But it means that these greats had vegetables at hand all the time, and that would be healthy for the digestive system. So it wasn't that they were involved in worldly pleasures for the sake of pleasure. So what are these vegetables? The omamar. So first we have tznon, right? Tznon is a radish. And mechatecha ochel, somehow the radish, when you eat it, it helps break down the food into smaller parts to aid the digestive system. Chazeres mahapech machol, and when you eat romaine lettuce, it sort of turns the food around and around in the digestive system. And kishos, which are either maybe it's a kind of a pumpkin or it's a cucumber. Marchiv me'ayim, it expands the intestines. The Gemara questions on the side here, a little bit of digression. V'atana debei Rabbi Shmuel Lomanikreis Shma Kishuim. Why are they called Kishuim? Mipnei shekoshim. So the word Kishuyim, the name for these cucumbers, comes from the language of koshim. Excuse me for just 1 minute. I have to answer this phone. I apologize. Sorry. So we're talking about the health benefits of cucumbers, and the Gemara now questions, based on the brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, it seems that kishuim is miloshon mipnei shekoshim legufo shel odom kecharevos. Right, they are injurious to the body as swords, so it's not something healthy. Lokash, the Gemara differentiates between two categories of cucumbers. Ha beravre, the large cucumbers are not so healthy, they're more harmful, but ha bezutre, the smaller ones, the baby ones, apparently are beneficial. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah. Yom HaLeid of Yom HaMisa. Right, Reb Meir says that there are pagan holidays that commemorate the emperor's birthday and the anniversary of his death. And therefore, we don't do business with the pagans for 3 days before those special dates. Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Meir, and they hold that before the anniversary of the emperor's death, it's not necessarily automatically so that there's a prohibition before that date of business transactions. It really depends upon the significance or the, shall I say, the, what word am I looking for? The prestige, if you will, of that king, and every king is a little different. Okay, then? Now, according to Chachamim, how do we gauge whether or not that prestige of that king is so great that the idol worshippers will commemorate the day of his birth, the day of his death? And the answer is it all depends on whether they burn his. It was accepted amongst the goyim that when a king dies, then anything he used, anything that was a personal article of his, we don't want anyone to have any benefit from it, so we burn it publicly in the public square. And that indicates how prestigious the king was. And on the anniversary of his death, they would commemorate that in the idolatry. Michlal Rabbi Meir Savar Loshna Misa Sheish Basreifa, Loshna Misa Sheish Basreifa, and Rabbi Meir made it a flat rule that on the anniversary of the death of the king or the emperor, it doesn't matter whether or not they burnt his articles. Is Palchi Le Avodas Kochab. Nevertheless, they worshipped their deities on the anniversary of his death, even though this was a king that they didn't burn his personal articles publicly. Alma, we see that Sreifa Lav Chukahi. You see that according to Rabbi Meir, the concept of burning the personal articles is not a reflection of religious, idol worship, because if so, then even Rabbi Meir should have accepted that if they don't burn his articles, then it's not going to be an idolatrous holiday, but rather the idea of burning his personal articles is not a chukah. It's not a chukah. Chukah means chukas avodah zara. It's not part of their idol worship, but rather it's a certain expression of honor and prestige for the king after he dies. And Rabbi Meir holds it's totally irrelevant to the question of idolatrous celebrations. And even if the king, did not reach that level that they would burn his burqa, nevertheless, Rabbi Meir holds that has nothing to do with chukah, with the idolatrous. So even so, that there would still be a prohibition of doing business 3 days before that day. It would seem that according to the Rabbanon, why is it dependent, the idol worship, why is it dependent upon whether they burnt his articles or not? It means that burning articles is part of their idol worship, and they made an idolatry, or shall we say a connection to their idolatry on the anniversary of a king for whom they burnt his personal articles. Frekta Gemara, if that be the case, if according to the Rabbanan it's a chukah, it's part of the idolatry that they burn his personal artifacts after his death. Now, what are you going to do with the Bryce says Sofer HaMelachim v'lav darkei Amorihi? We have a law that when a Jewish king dies, we will burn his artifacts publicly, and we're not worried about chukah. And yet the Torah says, "B'chukosem lo telechu, I chukahi anan hechi sarfinon." If this is part of the religious cult of the idol worshippers, then how could we follow suit and burn the articles of the king when the Torah says, "B'chukosem lo telechu"? And therefore, the Gemara says, "Elakuli masreifo lav chukahi." Even the Rabbanan agree that burning the articles of the king is not an expression of their idolatry, but rather chashivusi, it's all a reflection of whether the king has certain prestige in the eyes of the people. Even if the king who died was not so prestigious that they would burn his artifacts publicly, nevertheless, it is palchi le'avodas gar. They do worship their deity on the anniversary of the death of the king, any king. For Rabbanan Sarvi, the Rabbanan disagree, and they hold misa sheyesh basreifa chashiva le. If it's so important to them that the king died, and the death of the king was so important to them, that they certainly would have had given him the chashivos, the honor of after posthumously of burning his upalchi bahu, and then, since they indicated how prestigious he was in their eyes, therefore they would go into their idolatry temples, and they would worship on that day. But she'ein basreifa, if he's not prestigious in their eyes, and haraya, the proof is that they don't burn his articles publicly, lo chashivale, he's not so prestigious, lo palchile, they're not going to make it into a day of worshiping their deity. Gufa sorfen amalach ve'im ba mishum darkei memori. This is not a matter of imitating the religions of the idol worshippers when you burn the artifacts of the king. Shenemar, because it says b'shalom tabus. Right? Okay, here we have to give a little bit of background. In Yirmiyahu Hanavi, Yirmiyahu turns to Tzidkiyahu, the last melech of Yehuda, as the Babylonians are conquering the land, and then even though Tzidkiyahu, you will be defeated, Yirmiyahu assures him that he will not be killed by these invading forces. Instead, he will die a natural death. He'll be buried in a manner that fits a king, with the burning of his personal effects. So you see that the burning of the king's articles has a source in the Torah itself. And even if the pagans imitate us, we don't have a problem if we do the same thing, because we're not imitating them, but rather we're doing exactly what the Torah wants us to do. And that's called misrafos avosecha. We go on in the Bryce, it says, Shem shesorfran malachim kach sorfran nesiyim. The same honor we give after the death of the king, we give after the death of the Nasi, right? The Nasi was the head of the Sanhedrin in Israel. Umayim sorfin malachim, what do they burn? What do they burn? What articles are burnt publicly after the death of the king? Mitasan, the bed on which the king slept. Klei tashmishan, or any articles that he used directly, he ate from them and so forth and so on. Maisa shemeis from Gamliel HaZaken, when Ram Gamliel HaZaken died, saraf all of Unkelos Hager, again we're back to Unkelos, shivim monetzoris, a massive amount of money. What's going on over here? Ha'amrid mayin sorfin aleim, mitasan klei tashmishan. Well, why is Unkelos burning currency publicly? And the Gemara answers, Ema b'shivim monetzori. It doesn't mean that Unkelos was burning the money, but rather those artifacts that he burnt had the value of that money. Frek the Gemara, umidi achrini lo. Are you telling me that based on the rice that you quoted, the only thing that they burnt was mitasan, uklei tashmishan, and not their animals? V'atanya okrin al hamaloch v'emamishum darkimor. We do what's called an akira, which is called hamstrunging in fancy English, on the animals that the king used or benefited from, and that's part of the religious action that we take for the death of a king, and it has nothing to do with Darkei Amori. We are not imitating the goyim. In any event, it says okrim. Now, the word okrim applies to animals. As we said before, you do a certain surgical operation. Omar Papa, sus sherachim alav. When it says in the price that okrim, it's referring to only one specific animal, and that animal has the status, can be classified and described almost as klei tashmishon, because since the king rides the horse, it's one of his personal effects. In fact, the Gemara Behema Torah Lo, are you telling me that other than a sus, the other animals, let's say he had smaller animals like sheep and tzon and bakar, these animals, cows and so forth, they were not included in this whole ceremony. For Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Iker sheyesh ba treifa asur, she'ein ba treifa mutter. That the Iker that we're going to do, which we'll see exactly again the nature of that surgery in the animals, that Iker is done in respect for the king after his death. If it's ein ba treifa, which means that it's a kind of surgical operation that does not create tarfa, so it won't make the animal into a treifa. Now, why is it that if this surgical operation would make the animal into treifa, it's prohibited? So the number of possible answers to that question. One answer might be baltashkas. Why? Because you cannot eat a treifa, and by subjecting the animal to this surgical operation, you have made it into a treifa, and now you're being mashchis. You can no longer enjoy the benefit of the animal by eating it. Another possibility is because of tsar balei chaim, you're inflicting pain on the animal.